My fellow Americans,
You might be wondering, why in the world is there a 30-minute countdown before the show starts? Well, we actually start live every day at 4 p.m. Eastern time, so this whole 30-minute countdown is a chance for YouTube and Rumble to send out their alerts and notifications, so we encourage you to gather up and hang out with everyone in the chat room. So every day at 4 p.m. Eastern time is when we do this show live. You can join us for the countdown if you like, or just set your clock and reminder that at 4 p.m. Eastern is when we go live. You can also make sure you subscribe and turn on that bell notification, so hopefully you will get a notification.
What do you have to say about dictators of countries like Indonesia, who we sell weapons to, yet they are slaughtering people in East Timor? What do you have to say about Israel, who is slaughtering Palestinians, who impose martial law? What do you have to say about that? Those are our allies. Why do we sell weapons to these countries? Why do we support them? Why do we bomb Iraq when it commits similar problems?
There are various examples of things that are not right in this world, and the United States is trying. I really am surprised that people feel that it is necessary to defend the rights of Saddam Hussein, when what we ought to be thinking about is how to make sure that he does not use weapons of mass destruction.
I'd like to...
Who are shouting? Just a moment.
I'm not defending them in the least. What I am saying is that there needs to be consistent application of U.S. foreign policy. We cannot support people who are committing the same violations because they are political allies. That is not acceptable. We cannot violate UN resolutions when it is convenient to us. You're not answering my question, Madam Albright.
You briefed the press, did you not, when you were there?
Well, I had several jobs. One of my jobs was that of analyst. I also was an interrogator and indeed briefed the press when we, the CIA, wanted to circulate disinformation on a particular issue. Disinformation is not necessarily a lie. It may be a half-truth. And we would pick out a journalist. I would go do the briefing and hope that he would put the information in print.
What was your percentage of success?
We were pretty successful in planting information of a rather rarefied nature. For instance, if we wanted to get across to the American public that the North Vietnamese were building up their force structure in South Vietnam, I would go to a journalist and advise him that in the past 6 months, X number of North Vietnamese forces had come down the Ho Chi Minh Trail system through southern Laos. Now, there is no way a journalist can check that information. That's data derived from radio intercepts, spy in the sky photography. So either he goes with the information or he doesn't, and ordinarily or usually, the journalist would go with it because it looked like some kind of exclusive. Go after these gentlemen. I would be directed to cultivate them, to spend time with them at the Caravel Hotel or the Continental Hotel, to socialize with them, and slowly but surely to try to gain their confidence by dolloping out valid information which was true. And then I would drop into a conversation the data that we wanted to get across, which might not be true. One piece of data, for instance, that we managed to plan in the New Yorker magazine had to do with a supposed North Vietnamese effort in 1973 to develop airfields along the border of South Vietnam. The reason we wanted to plant this information was that we were trying to persuade the U.S. Congress that Saigon should continue to get a great deal of aid and that the North Vietnamese were the chief violators of the ceasefire accord. That was printed in the New Yorker magazine under the byline of Robert Chaplin, as indeed was a great deal of such information which we tried to circulate.
Frank, a two-part question. What were the objectives of or what was the objective of the CIA? What about the moral implications of what you were doing in feeding disinformation? Did the objective override the moral implications, moral problems?
Well, the objective of the agency in general is to generate intelligence and get it back to Washington, to get at the truth and make sure the policymakers understand it. When you plant disinformation, you are diverging from that objective, and I think probably in retrospect, it was very counterproductive. I am, as an ex-CIA agent, opposed to the disinformation activities in which I was involved. I admit that I was involved, and I think it served no useful purpose. Propagandizing the American public or Congress is not the CIA's job. As to the morality of what the CIA was doing or that particular activity, the war was a very relative thing. It was a relativist environment, and morality seldom came into play when you were operating in the field. In my estimation, a CIA man should be amoral. That may sound pretty shocking to somebody, but what if my morality were that of a Nazi or agent, if you will? You wouldn't want me to be your intelligence officer. Keep the morals out of intelligence. Keep the truth in, and stay away from disinformation.
It would have been more appropriate for Mr. Trudeau, Prime Minister of Canada, to address this House according to Article 144, an article which was specifically designed to debate violations of human rights, democracy, and the rule of law, which is clearly the case with Mr. Trudeau. Then again, a Prime Minister who openly admires the Chinese basic dictatorship, who tramples on fundamental rights by persecuting and criminalizing his own citizens as terrorists just because they dared to stand up to his perverted concept of democracy, should not be allowed to speak in this House at all. Mr. Trudeau, you are a disgrace for any democracy. Please spare us your presence. Thank you.
And it might sound radical, colleagues, but the answer to war is not more war, it's peace. And peace isn't delivered by the barrel of a gun, it's delivered by diplomacy, by dialogue. You can wish away your continent's history, but we share a continent with Russia. We will sit down with Russia. There will be a negotiated peace, and this organisation should be promoting it earlier rather than delaying it and making sure that more Ukrainians die. Your feigning of sympathy rings hollow. It makes me sick, to be honest with you.
We become involved when disinformation poses a threat to the security of our country. It is when there's a connectivity to a threat to our country. It could be a threat, a connectivity to violence. And what this working group does, is precisely what I would think you would want it to do, which is to take a look at the work, the disinformation work that our department has done, and ask the following questions. Do we have policies? Do we have guardrails? Do we have standards?
But here's the problem. We can't even agree. We can't even agree what disinformation is. You can't even agree that it was disinformation, that the Russians fed information to the Steele dossier. If you can't agree to that, how are we ever going to come to an agreement on what is disinformation so you can police it on social media?
Senator, I have 2 points, if I may finish. Number one, that what this office, what this working group does, because it's not an office, what this working group does is ensure that there are guardrails definitions, standards to make sure that the free speech rights, the civil rights, civil liberties, and privacy rights of individuals.
So do you think COVID disinformation threatens our national security?
And number two, if I may, Senator, and number two, is it your proposition that when the cartels spread disinformation with respect to our immigration policies to try to lure vulnerable migrants to our border illegally?
I think you've got no idea what disinformation is, and I don't think the government's capable of it. Do you know who the greatest propagator of disinformation in the history of the world is? The U.S. government. Are you familiar with McNamara, the Pentagon Papers? Are you familiar with George W. Bush and the weapons of mass destruction? Are you familiar with Iran-Contra? I mean, think of all the debates and disputes we've had over the last 50 years in our country. We work them out by debating them. We don't work them out by the government being the arbiter. I don't want guardrails. I want you to have nothing to do with speech. You think we can't determine, speech by traffickers is disinformation? You think the American people are so stupid they need you to tell them what the truth is? You can't even admit what the truth is with the Steele dossier. I don't trust government to figure out what the truth is. Government is largely disseminating disinformation.
You would know this this is a bit of an aside, but in terms of how you think about problem sets, when I was a cadet, what's the cadet motto at West Point? You will not lie, cheat, or steal, or tolerate those who do. I was the CIA director. We lied, we cheated, we stole. It was like we had entire training courses.
We had a good discussion on ensuring global energy security and adequate oil supplies to support global economic growth, and that will begin shortly. I'm doing all I can to increase the supply for the United States of America, which I expect to happen. The Saudis share that urgency, and based on our discussions today, I expect we'll see further steps in the coming weeks.
Are you worried about
Hey everyone, just as a reminder, our show starts at 4 p.m. Eastern Time, just a few minutes from now, but I should remind you that we have a daily newsletter. It's totally free. Natalie and I work very hard on it every morning over a cup of coffee, putting the stories together that we think are important that the mainstream media is going to ignore. All you need to do is go to our website. It's just redacted.inc. Put in your email address. We won't ever sell your email to anybody. And then you'll receive a welcome email, and all you need to do is verify that email, and 7 a.m. Eastern Time is when we send out our daily newsletter. And it's about 5 or 10 minutes in length that you can read it over your cup of coffee. And like I said, we cover 4 or 5 of the big stories of the day, plus a couple of things you might have missed while you were sleeping. We try to have some fun with it, add a little humor into it. And again, it's a great way to start off your morning. But it's also a great way for us to stay connected with you as well, because we've been banned and blocked on some of these platforms before, where we haven't been allowed to post anything, not even a community post. So the only way for us to stay connected with you is through our newsletter. We were able to send out a newsletter and say, hey everyone, we're blocked for the next week, and let you know what was actually going on with our show. Anyway, go to redacted.inc and sign up for the free newsletter, and it'll be posted first thing in the morning over your cup of coffee.
One of the hopeful things that I've discovered is that nearly every war that has started in the past 50 years has been a result of media lies. The media could have stopped it if they had searched deep enough. If they hadn't reprinted government propaganda, they could have stopped it. But what does that mean? Well, that means basically populations don't like wars. And populations have to be fooled into wars. Populations don't willingly and with open eyes go into a war. So if we have a good media environment, then we'll also have a peaceful environment.
You killed a million people in Iraq.
That is a separate...
You killed a million people in Iraq. It's incredible that you have the brass neck to be sitting here now urging another Iraq war
George,
after
if
what
I
you've
was
already
still in
done.
Parliament,
There can be no doubt that Saddam Hussein has biological weapons and the capability to rapidly produce more, many more. And he has the ability to dispense these lethal poisons and diseases in ways that can cause massive death and destruction. If biological weapons seem too terrible to contemplate, chemical weapons are equally chilling. UNMOVIC already laid out much of this, and it is documented for all of us to read in UNSCOM's 1999 report on the subject. If we consider just one category of missing weaponry, 6,500 bombs from the Iran-Iraq war, UNMOVIC says the amount of chemical agent in them would be in the order of 1,000 tons. These quantities of chemical weapons are now unaccounted for. Dr. Blick says, quipped that, quote, mustard gas is not marmalade. You are supposed to know what you did with it. We believe Saddam Hussein knows what he did with it, and he has not come clean with the international community. We have evidence these weapons existed. What we don't have is evidence from Iraq that they have been destroyed or where they are. That is what we are still waiting for.
Okay, inspection worth doing, everybody's agreed it's worth doing, and it gets stopped.
Yes, sir.
At that moment, we're an automatic pilot as far as you're concerned. Period. No ifs, ands, or buts. Now, I respect that. But now, it seems to me the Secretary of State might have a slightly different problem. Secretary of State might be sitting there and saying, now look over there on that side. Now, I remember so-and-so and so-and-so and so-and-so, and the 12 people on this side, they're all the ones that said they didn't want to use force. Now, I'm going to have to go tell the president now that we should, or Secretary Cohen, unleash whatever it takes to get it done. And our military assessment is the same as the majors. The majors' assessment is, privately held but publicly acknowledged later, that airstrikes alone aren't going to do this. Saddam's not going to cave on this. So, now here's the deal. I recommended the president have at it and let the chips fall where they may. A reasonable position for the Secretary of Defense, the Secretary of State to take. But I respectfully suggest, Major, I respectfully suggest they have a responsibility slightly above your pay grade. Slightly above your pay grade. To decide whether or not to take the nation to war alone, or to take the nation to war partway, or to take the nation to war halfway. That's a real tough decision. That's why they get paid the big bucks. That's why they get the limos and you don't. I mean this sincerely. I'm not trying to be flip, because I think, and that's why I said at the outset, the reason why I'm glad you did what you did, we should come to our milk. We should make a decision. But in terms of whether the Secretary of State has no more to consider than you do as the arms inspector. You didn't get in, didn't get my job done, get me in. Period. You made the deal, right? That's the deal. A deal's a deal. Get me in. Scott Ritter, I'm ready to go. It's not how it works. Now, maybe it should work that way. But wouldn't you acknowledge that if you were President of the United States or the Secretary of State, you'd sit there and say, now, okay, old Scotty boy didn't get in. We said he should get in. We want him to get in. It's important that he does get in. They're not going to let him in. So what are we going to do now? We know that France and Russia aren't going to be with us. We're quite confident China's not. We've already run those traps. They're not there. We're not sure where the United States Senate is, but have at it, boys. Go get them. And by the way, Scott and the boys say air power's not enough. I think it's a legitimate debate, Major. I think it's a legitimate debate. But I don't think we should be putting it in the context of, you have somebody up there at state saying, look, how can we weasel out of this agreement? We want to let this guy out there hanging. We're not this. It's a very practical political decision. Same kind of decision General Powell made. Same kind of decision President Bush made. Every president, every Secretary of State has to do it. Like I said, they get paid more than you. Their job's a hell of a lot more complicated than yours. They may have made the wrong decision, and you brought it to light. We should address it. We should say straight up where we are, and we should do it. And for that, I thank you. But it's above your pay grade.
About 10 days after 9/11, I went through the Pentagon, and one of the generals called me and he said, "Sir, you got to come in and talk to me a second." He says, "We've made the decision. We're going to war with Iraq." I said, "We're going to war with Iraq? Why?" He said, "I don't know." He said, "I guess they don't know what else to do." He said, "I guess it's like we don't know what to do about terrorists, but we got a good military and we can take down governments." And he said, "I guess if the only tool you have is a hammer, every problem has to look like a nail." So I came back to see him a few weeks later, and by that time we were bombing in Afghanistan. I said, "Are we still going to war with Iraq?" And he said, "Oh, it's worse than that." He reached over on his desk, he picked up a piece of paper. He said, "I just got this down from upstairs," meaning the Secretary of Defense's office today, and he said, "This is a memo that describes how we're going to take out 7 countries in 5 years, starting with Iraq and then Syria, Lebanon, Libya, Somalia, Sudan, and finishing off Iran."
Hey everyone, Clayton here. The show is going to start at 4 p.m. Eastern Time. I should remind you that we have a VIP community. It's our Redacted Rebel VIP community. Now, this show is totally free, what you're watching right now, right? You can subscribe here on YouTube and Rumble, totally free. But if you'd like to support independent journalism, we are run by you. Without you guys, we wouldn't be able to do this show. We wouldn't be able to hire the team that we have. We wouldn't be able to afford the servers that we have. We wouldn't be able to afford the reporters that we have, the team that we have. So you can support us by going to redacted.inc, and on the right side of your screen, you'll see a VIP community button. Just click that, and for the price of a cup of coffee once a month, you can support us. We put out exclusive content, early interviews that no one else will see, live streams just for our VIP Rebel community. So again, it's totally free to watch this show, but if you do want to support independent journalism, we would really appreciate it. Come on over to redacted.inc, click on that community button, and decide if you want to sign up or not. It's totally up to you. We thank you. And meanwhile, the show will start in just a few moments at 4 p.m. Eastern Time.
Well, one of the 4 principal functions of the CIA is to gather intelligence and ideally forward it to the president, the users of information, the policymakers, as they say. There are other functions, however, some of them more legitimate than others. One is to run secret wars, the covert action that's written and talked about so much, like what's happening in Nicaragua today from Honduras. Another thing is to disseminate propaganda to influence people's minds, and this is a major function of the CIA. And unfortunately, of course, it overlaps into the gathering of information. You have contact with a journalist, you will give him true stories, you'll get information from him, you'll also give him false stories. For example, in my war, the Angola war that I helped to manage, 1/3 of my staff was propaganda. Ironically, it's called covert action inside the CIA. Outside, that means the violent part. I had propagandists all over the world, principally in London, Kinshasa, and Zambia. We would take stories which we would write and put them in the Zambia Time, and then pull them out and send them to a journalist on our payroll in Europe. But his cover story, you see, would be that he'd gotten them from his stringer in Lusaka, who had gotten them from the Zambia Time. We had the complicity of the government of Zambia, Kenneth Kaunda, if you will, to put these false stories into his newspapers. But after that point, the journalists, Reuters and AFP, the management was not witting of it. Now, our contact man in Europe was, and we pumped just dozens of stories about Cuban atrocities, Cuban rapists. In one case, we had the Cuban rapists caught and tried by the Ovimbundu maidens who had been their victims, and then we ran photographs that made almost every newspaper in the country of the Cubans being executed by the Ovimbunda women who supposedly had been their victims.
These were fake photos?
Oh, absolutely. We didn't know of one single atrocity committed by the Cubans. It was pure, raw, false propaganda to create an illusion of communists, eating babies for breakfast and that sort of totally false propaganda.
The only reason that I'm allowed to ask you this question is because today the federal court ruled that the government doesn't have the right to determine who is or is not a journalist. This is the second election in a row that the court had to overturn your government. Do you still insist on being able to make that decision, and why?
First of all, questions around accreditation were handled by the press gallery and the consortium of networks who have strong perspectives on quality journalism and the important information that is shared with Canadians. The reality is organizations like yours that continue to spread misinformation and disinformation on the science around vaccines, around how we're going to actually get through this pandemic and be there for each other and keep our kids safe, is part of why we're seeing such unfortunate anger and lack of understanding of basic science. And quite frankly, I won't call it a media organization, your group of individuals need to take accountability for some of the polarization that we're seeing in this country. And I think Canadians are cluing into the fact that there is a really important decision we take about the kind of country we want to see. And I salute all extraordinary, hardworking journalists that put science and facts at the heart of what they do and ask me tough questions every day, but make sure that they are educating and informing Canadians from a broad range of perspectives, which is the last thing that you guys do.
Whatever our hopes may be for the future, for reducing this threat or living with it, there is no escaping either the gravity or the totality of its challenge to our survival and to our security. A challenge that confronts us in unaccustomed ways in every sphere of human activity. This deadly challenge imposes upon our society two requirements of direct concern, both to the press and to the President. Two requirements that may seem almost contradictory in tone, but which must be reconciled and fulfilled if we are to meet this national peril. I refer first to the need for far greater public information, and second, to the need for far greater official secrecy. The very word secrecy is repugnant in a free and open society, and we are, as a people, inherently and historically opposed to secret societies, to secret oaths, and to secret proceedings. We decided long ago that the dangers of excessive and unwarranted concealment of pertinent facts far outweighed the dangers which are cited to justify it. Even today, there is little value in opposing the threat of a closed society by imitating its arbitrary restrictions. Even today, there is little value in ensuring the survival of our nation if our traditions do not survive with it. And there is very grave danger that an announced need for increased security will be seized upon by those anxious to expand its meaning to the very limits of official censorship and concealment. That I do not intend to permit to the extent that it's in my control. And no official of my administration, whether his rank is high or low, civilian or military, should interpret my words here tonight as an excuse to censor the news, to stifle dissent, to cover up our mistakes, or to withhold from the press and the public the facts they deserve to know.
Welcome, everybody. Grab your beverage. Welcome into Redacted on this Monday. I'm Clayton Morris. Nice to see you.
I'm Natalie Morris. This is water.
This is water. It should be vodka because we're like facing friggin' Armageddon. I mean, it's like unbelievable talking to people around the world right now who are very concerned about what's happening. But we will try to navigate it here on this show, try to do it with a level head. And we are not funded by billionaires. So CNN, of course, absolutely wants Armageddon. They absolutely want war, and they'll fill their airways with it. So right now, we're going to look at the very latest in Israel. What does this mean when Israel says we're going to wipe Iran off the map if Hezbollah attacks in northern Gaza? The United States moving additional assets, warships to the region. China also moving major ships to that region. Vladimir Putin saying we're launching aircraft with Kinzhal missiles and hypersonic missiles right now over the Black Sea. I mean, we are like...
It's a global dogpile.
And by the way, President Biden's on a beach just hanging out. So...
It's cool.
Yeah, we'll be covering all of that tonight on the show.
Plus, the Canadian Health Service has admitted that there's SV40 DNA in the COVID vaccine, in the Pfizer one specifically. So does this mean that possibly there would be an opportunity to litigate against biopharma for all kinds of bad things? Well, we don't know if they're bad because health authorities won't study them. We're going to look into whether or not Pfizer will actually face a lawsuit. We're going to look into which pharmaceutical companies are facing lawsuits around COVID medicine. This is a big one. Also a big one is that the Supreme Court has taken up the free speech case around COVID censorship. The government is asking the Supreme Court now, please let us keep censoring people on the internet. The case they're making is amazingly crazy that they're even doing that. And we're going to talk about that case as well.
Also, Canada. You know, the MAID, the medically assisted in death or in dying, medical assistance in death.
Yeah.
It's crazy. They call it MAID. Like, it's just a simple MAID that's going to come to your house and kill you. So the assisted suicide, you know, Canada leads the charge in the world for assisted suicides. Now they're expanding it. We'll tell you exactly how they're expanding it because they want to keep going to be number one. You want to end up being killed by the government? Just go to Canada. All of that and more as Redacted starts right now. Thank you guys so much for subscribing to the channel. If you do subscribe, your name will pop up here on the big screen during the show. Subscriptions are free, of course, so thank you guys so much for subscribing. The analytics show us that only a certain percentage of you are actually subscribed. You can do that on Rumble as well and turn on notifications. I saw someone the other day on Rumble saying, I'm not going to subscribe because I have to put in my email in order to create an account on Rumble. David, do you know anything about that? I think that's just so that how they keep you keep spam away from people.
You're going to have to do that no matter what platform you're on. If you want to chat or anything, you do have to sign up. But, you know, they're not like most other platforms where they're sharing your information with third parties.
Yeah. So. And I think they do that also so you're not like anonymously chatting and trolling people too.
Well, you can't anonymously chat because then obviously, you know, you would get, that's how people troll and things like that. So
anyway, subscribe. It's free. And we'd love to have you here. It helps independent media. And I saw Mule Native here in the chat says, hi, Redacted. I am from East Africa. Big fan of your channel. I heard a long time ago there's a huge amount of crude oil deposits around the Gaza Strip. Is that true? That's interesting. I don't know the answer to that, but I wouldn't be surprised. Anytime the U.S. warships show up, there's probably oil nearby. There's usually oil or some other commodity nearby. That's why they hang out in Sudan, Somalia.
Yeah, well,
off the coast
we can't speak to that, but it's worth digging into.
Yeah, we will. All right, we've got a lot of news to get to here on your Monday. But we have a daily newsletter that people should sign up for.
Right, I'll tell you about that. That also is a free subscription. All you need is an email address, but we don't sell it or use it for anything other than emailing you things that a lot of times have to do with this show or other breaking news. It acts as a companion to this show. So you see a lot of the stories we're about to cover here. You just put in your email address, you get an email that looks like that. You click it and say, okay, we are now hooked up for free emails, for free redacted emails. So it is a lot of things that we talk about this show, but even more other things that are fun, like this little piece here about the woolly mammoth, some tidbits, party conversation.
Well, it's a newsletter.
Icebreakers, that kind of thing. But also, yes, it's a great way to find original links to sources for things that are happening because, we might give you our take on it, but we don't require that you take that. You should study it for yourself and come up with your own opinion. And then you're all the more informed when you get here to Redacted. So please sign up at redacted.inc. Again, it's totally free email newsletter. Once again, that's redacted.inc.
Well, the United States is ramping up additional assets, money, weapons to the Middle East. Israel says it will wipe Iran off the face of the earth if Hezbollah intervenes in Gaza. The Turks seem to be motivated to mediate. We heard from Erdogan over the past few minutes saying he would like to mediate a peace. This flies in the face of what Secretary of State Antony Blinken just said over the weekend, which is we're not interested in any kind of ceasefire, which is unbelievable. Joining me now is Colonel Douglas Macgregor, who just wrote a new piece saying that the Biden administration should lead the charge to support a ceasefire. Colonel, it appears they're really going in the opposite direction with Blinken's comments yesterday and now Erdogan coming out and saying, hey, we're happy to mediate a peace here.
No, I think that's true. And it looks as though the same people controlling events in Jerusalem are controlling events in Washington. And they are unanimous in their desire for a major war. And I don't think people understand the implications. People are viewing this as Hamas, as an enemy that richly deserves to be destroyed. There's no argument about that. The problem is, if you want to destroy Hamas, how do you go about doing it? And collective punishment that involves 2.2 million people is not a very popular way to do business. And particularly at this point in time, because the whole region is seething with anger over the attacks on the civilians in Gaza. There's no debate in the rest of the region about who's responsible. It's Israel. So you have the Israelis and all of their neighbors talking past each other. We are in a position to somehow or another address that and move this out of the realm of inevitable regional war into something more manageable. But there doesn't seem to be any interest in doing so.
The United States moving aircraft carriers, additional assets into the region. You make the point that this, you're right there involved in this. This is a very dangerous prospect for the United States.
Oh, it is. And people don't seem to understand that today's Middle East is radically different from the Middle East of 20, 30, 40, 50 years ago. The last major war was the 73 war, where Egypt and Syria attacked Israel, and Israel ultimately prevailed, although it was from time to time touch and go. Today, the Arab states are far more, I would argue, cohesive. The governments are stronger. They have more technology at their disposal, and there's a greater willingness to weigh in collectively. And today, we're also talking about Turkey and Iran as playing a major role, and as a result, Russia. Russia cannot sit idly by if Iran ends up being attacked by us. It will feel obligated to intervene because the Iranians have supported the Russians against the Ukrainian proxies. So this has the ingredients in it for a very major war. Now, we're escalating across the boards. We seem to think that escalation works. We've tried that in Ukraine. We've escalated and escalated and escalated, and today Ukraine is in ruins. My great fear is that if this regional war unfolds as I think it might, there may be no Israel at the end of it.
You're right. You write in your piece that Israel could become the next Ukraine if we don't watch out. How do you mean?
Well, first of all, Hezbollah that sits up in the north is not simply backed by Iran, but we estimate they have 100 to 150,000 of their own fighters. Plus, some estimates are between 130,000 and 140,000 rockets and missiles. of which at least 40,000 are extremely precise. Now, there's enough armament in Hezbollah to destroy half of Israel. Hezbollah has made it clear that if, in fact, the Israelis march into Gaza with the objective of rooting out Hamas and without regard, frankly, to the loss of life there, and, let's be honest, if you're going to march into a city and fight, the notion that you can pick and choose your targets is absurd. So the loss of life will be enormous. This is the catalyst for a regional war, and the Iranians have said it. The Turks have said it. Everyone has said this is unacceptable. King Hussein, or not Hussein, but Abdullah in Jordan gave a brilliant speech in Cairo explaining that he shared the Israelis' horror at what had happened to them and thought that they had responded reasonably under the circumstances, but said collective punishment that involves 2.2 million people and driving them out of their homes and into the desert is simply unacceptable. This is an impasse because we have a full court press in the United States to emphasize why we should be doing this, why we should be co-belligerents with Israel. And that's effectively what we're becoming in a very real sense. And that puts us at risk of confrontation with Iran, with the Turks, and with Russia.
Israel over the weekend saying that they will consider civilians who are in the northern part, remain in North Gaza, terrorist accomplices, quoting. The Israeli military has told Palestinian civilians living there that if they don't evacuate south, they will be considered an accomplice in a terrorist organization. So trying to root out Hamas, going into these caves, this is going to be an absolute disaster. It's going to be, we've already seen how much of a disaster this is. And the Israeli infantry going in, talk about that part of it, going into these cave structures where Hamas has been holed up and living in these massive booby-trapped caves. I've talked to some Israeli sources who tell me that they are absolutely terrified what's going to happen to the infantry if they go in. They will be slaughtered by the structures that are underneath those cities and underneath North Gaza. Can you speak on that, the military strategy of this on the part of the Israelis?
Well, keep in mind that the Israeli Defense Force on the ground consists of a small portion of professional soldiers. The vast majority of people that are being mobilized are simply civilians. They're reservists. I've been told that these reservists are not nearly as well trained and prepared as their predecessors were in 1973. That means that they have even less training and less preparation than you would want for such a complex operation. But let's assume you have a couple of weeks to train. You're not going to reach the level of expertise that you would want to deal with what you're describing, these tunnels. And remember that the Israelis have destroyed most of this area in northern Gaza, which makes it much easier for Hamas to defend itself. When you leave buildings intact, you're always at risk of bad things happening, but you have a way to navigate through it to root out the enemy. Now that everything has been rubbled, you have no idea where you're headed and what you're doing. Now, I'm sure the Israelis will use everything at their disposal: persistent surveillance overhead, careful targeting of anything they think is hostile. And I'm sure that the soldiers on the ground will do the best they can. But that's still not going to prevent you from taking very heavy casualties for all the reasons that you cite, IEDs and so forth. Now, there is one other possibility, and that is that the Israelis may decide to use fuel-air explosive. And fuel-air explosive over a square, let's say a couple of square miles, essentially sucks all the oxygen out of the area and then ignites it into a fireball. We use these things in Vietnam. They could certainly use these things against both Hamas and Hezbollah. And frankly, I think for their purposes, it would be necessary. But imagine the response of the region. Imagine how the Turks and the Iranians, the Egyptians, Jordanians, Saudis, Syrians, everyone will feel when they witness this. Again, I don't see this as a very positive outcome for Israel. And I think we're grossly underestimating the military potential of those lining up against Israel. And remember, Russia does not want to be in this. Right. Russia wants to remain neutral. But Russia's relationship with Iran is very, very close. And if you attack Iran, you're going to end up at war with Russia.
Is the center of all of this MBS, Mohammed bin Salman, Of course, Saudi Arabia, maybe the most important man in the world at this moment. I've heard that thrown around over the past few days. The idea of a unified Muslim world, the greatest threat perhaps to Israel, a unified front, no divisions between Shia, Sunni, and others. And you have a unified Muslim world saying, down with Israel?
Well, normally the Israelis are very good at practicing economy of enemies. They've always been good at that. Deal with one at a time if you can and turn your potential opponents against each other. Unfortunately, this time, they've done the opposite, and we're helping them to do it over and over and over again every day, and that is that they've united the opposition. You're absolutely right. Now, is MBS in charge of it? I think has a very influential role because of his position in Saudi Arabia, which is effectively for Muslims the equivalent of the Holy Land. So what he says carries great weight. But you've got other actors. Qatar has funded not only Hamas, but also Mr. Erdogan in Turkey. Without Qatari funding, the Turks would be in serious economic trouble. So there are other actors that are playing into this, and you shouldn't underestimate General Sisi in Egypt. The Egyptians have maintained very good relations with the Israelis, but their government cannot survive what the Israelis are doing in Gaza. And the pressure on him to mobilize his army and go forward and fight potentially to protect the Gazans is enormous. Now, if you're an Israeli and you're angry and you're emoting about what you've seen, you may not be satisfied when you've killed 10,000 more or 20,000 more Palestinians. But you've got to have someone who is rational in charge. Everyone is emoting right now. We are emoting, the Israelis are emoting, and so are the Muslims. Emotion is the killer. Emotion leads to bad decisions and bad outcomes. What's needed now is cool, calm, collected thinking. And we need to understand that however much we hate Hamas, taking the current approach is the road to Armageddon in the Middle East. And we haven't even talked about nuclear weapons. And people don't seem to understand that, of course, the Israelis have a nuclear weapon, and they've made it abundantly clear that if pushed to the wall, that they would use it. But they forget that, for instance, Turkey has very close relations with the Pakistani military. The Pakistani military and government has made it clear repeatedly over many, many years that if the Turks need nuclear warheads to protect themselves, they will receive them. So you're talking about a double envelopment, if you will. You're not only dealing with the high-end conventional warfare, the introduction of all these missiles and rockets and unmanned aircraft, you're also dealing with this evil shadow of nuclear exchange hovering over the region. So I keep advising anyone who will listen, back off, think about this carefully. And I'm very grateful that the Israelis to this point have not yet gone in. That gives us a breathing space. We need that.
Secretary Blinken yesterday said that he sees no indication that Israel wants to control Gaza in perpetuity. Do you buy that?
Gaza has been a huge problem for a long time. Many Americans are unaware of it, but during the Camp David Accords discussions, Menachem Begin actually offered Sadat Gaza, said, please take it off our hands. We don't want it. And at the time, Sadat said, I've got so many problems inside my own country, I can't take on any more. As a result, Gaza has been this island of misery and misfortune. Now, you could certainly blame that to some extent on the inhabitants, but, people have referred to it, not without reason, as the world's largest open-air prison or concentration camp. Now, the Israelis have had to take stringent measures to protect themselves because Gaza is a permanent thorn in their sides. So I don't think they want it. I think they would like to remove it. The problem is if you push 2 million or 1.5 million or whatever it turns out to be Arabs into the Sinai, which is the real plan I think the Israelis would like to follow, you've just pushed the problem 20 miles away.
Right.
Hamas is more than people. It's an idea. It is steeped in hatred, but it is widely regarded in the Middle East because they will not surrender.
It's a hydra. Right? Is it fair to call it a hydra? I mean, and it's not even top down from what I understand. It's not like you have some leader sitting at the top. You have a multiple headed hydra that you cut one head off, it'll just keep popping up.
Yes, absolutely. And I think the Israelis understand that, but their only solution is force. I think you have to somehow or another rob Hamas and others of their raison d'etre. Now, how do you do that? Well, you've got to reopen discussions about the future of the Palestinians, which is something else the Israelis don't want to do. They don't want a two-state solution. They regard that as a threat to themselves. And you have a substantial portion of the people supporting Netanyahu who think this is their opportunity to create a greater Israel that reaches from the Jordan River to the sea. Now, I understand all of these things. I'm an American. I'm not an Israeli. And I'm not unsympathetic. But I don't think it serves Israel's interest to pursue these goals. And if they do, we and they are going to be drawn into a very large regional war in the Middle East. And what have we got to send? We can certainly send ships, although you've got 90 aircraft on each aircraft carrier, of which 40 or 50 are attack aircraft. You have a flotilla that's there largely to protect the carriers so they can launch their strikes, but they're also operating from a very long way offshore, so far that they may have to land in Israel after executing their strikes to refuel. Then they're up against air defenses. Now, the air defenses that are there are Russian, but they're also part of Syria. Those air defenses can be turned to use against us, so we'll probably lose aircraft. Then the question is, if you can't influence things on the ground in Israel, what can you do? We have no army. We really have no army anymore. It's down to about 450,000. It's a shadow of its former self. If you can't put forces on the ground, you're not going to change anything. And the Israelis, again, they're talking about a force of 470,000 to 500,000. That's larger than the U.S. Army. 2,000 Marines offshore, 2,000 special forces working with the Israelis are not going to win a war.
And so, yeah, we look at being dragged into a larger absolute mess right now. Armageddon, to use your word. Colonel, I want to encourage everyone to read your latest piece on this. I think it's really interesting and thoughtful, and it raises some really serious questions. You know, if possible, that Israel could wind up like Ukraine if we don't watch out as this unfolds here. Thank you so much, Colonel. Great to see you as always. I appreciate it.
Sure. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Colonel.
Well, that was cheerful. Jeez.
But very, very intelligent. And, you know, I have to say, I mean, think about, you know, the idea of Israel turning into Ukraine. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this in the chat below. Let us know. Do you think that that's a possibility here? And of course, if he thinks we're Israel's slow walking towards suicide by carrying out these attacks and moving in this direction, that means you have the entire region coming together in a way that, what else could unite all of the Muslim world? Well, Israel going on a massive attack like this would absolutely. So it's interesting to see what MBS, is he the most powerful man in the world right now in Saudi Arabia? Let us know your thoughts on that and more in the chat below. Thank you to everyone who's joining us and subscribing from around the world. Let us know where you're joining us from. We're live every day at 4 p.m. Eastern time. So good to see all of you. Let us know where you're joining us from. I see West Africa here. I saw Scotland. I see everyone. So great to see all of you.
Australia, yeah. And even, you know, a lot of the things that Colonel McGregor has said about since the beginning of the conflict between Russia and Ukraine, those things ended up being very valid. So a lot of times I hear him and I'm like, oh my God, could that be? And it plays out. So it's worth tracking what he has to say. We really appreciate his expertise.
He doesn't have a lot of friends in the Pentagon anymore because he, you know, tells the truth, you know. What's that, Phil?
It's kind of rough. It's kind of rough listening to people that know what they're talking about, because it's in times like this. It's like when they tell you and you're like, oh, don't tell me that. You know, like,
right.
Can we find can you find just some like rando that doesn't know what's going on and interview him sometimes, so we can be like, oh, I feel pretty good about this. I feel good about the world right now.
Yeah, let's go to CNN for that.
But bunch of people in Norway tonight. Good to see all of our Norway friends. I see a lot of Norway. Norway today, by the way, did you see, we had this in the newsletter, Norway has now offering, what is it, $1,300 basically for any Ukrainians who are in Norway to basically get the F out of Norway and head back to Ukraine.
To die.
I mean, they're not all of military fighting age, but yes, obviously, if they're military fighting age men, get them out of there, Norway. That's what Norway wants to do, get them out of there.
Yeah. Well, we're going to talk about the COVID vaccine coming up and what litigation might have been pierced the corporate armor that protects all of these pharmaceutical companies. We're also going to talk about free speech and the ability to kill yourself in Canada if you're addicted to drugs. why not? But first, we want to tell you about our friends over at Magnesium Breakthrough, because if you have problems tossing and turning, like I do, this weekend I did that twice. Clayton walked downstairs and he's like, "What are you doing?" I was running spreadsheets. That's what I was doing.
And that was a night when you didn't take magnesium. And
well,
then the next night I was
to-
like, okay, you're not doing that again.
In order to get to sleep, though, sometimes, if I forget, I take this later in the night, and there's no fear that you would be groggy the next day. Whereas if it's the middle of the night and you take a sleeping pill, then by 5, 6, 7 a.m. when you have to get up, you are not in good shape because you're going to feel terrible. Not with Magnesium Breakthrough. And this is a natural supplement that helps you calm your mind, calm your body, and go to sleep, and you don't feel hungover in the morning. Now, unlike other magnesium supplements that might be giving you just 1 or 2 forms of magnesium, Magnesium Breakthrough contains all 7 forms of magnesium designed to help calm your mind and help you fall asleep and stay asleep and then wake up refreshed. Over 75% of the population is magnesium deficient. Maybe that's why you toss and turn like this lady here. But again, if you're not taking a supplement that has all 7 forms of magnesium, you're still deficient, because not only does Magnesium Breakthrough help you sleep better, it helps you feel grounded and relaxed during the day, especially before bed. So don't miss out on the most relaxing sleep ever with Magnesium Breakthrough. For an exclusive offer, our listeners can go to magbreakthrough.com/redacted. Do it now. Your body and brain will thank you. You can use this URL and use our promo code redacted and save 10% on your order. Again, that's magbreakthrough.com/redacted, promo code redacted for 10% off. Nurture your mind and body with this all natural full spectrum magnesium supplement. Again, that's magbreakthrough.com/redacted.
All right, guys, stop in the chat saying RIP to different celebrities, because you get me a lot of times. I see people say, sorry, rest in peace, Morgan Freeman. I'm like, what? And then rest in peace, Adam Sandler. They are not dead, so stop doing that. Also, hey, if you subscribe to the channel, your name will pop up here. Poseidon Kraken just subscribe to the channel. So if you subscribe during our live show, your name should pop right up here. And if you become a Redacted Rebel VIP, that will also show up here on the big screen as well.
All right. Well, now excuse me, let me take that again. Now Big Pharma can be sued for COVID products, and that means Pfizer may have to answer to this SV40 that was recently discovered in their COVID vaccine. Now, we're going to circle back around to this big revelation that Pfizer had this DNA sequence in their vaccine. Who knew about it? Is it dangerous? Why are we just learning about it now? Now, this came out of Health Canada that admitted to it, but no American health agencies have admitted to it yet. But this is a biggie, you guys. It's what lawyers call piercing the corporate armor. So, these corporations have litigation protection. They have liability protection. Well, now in Michigan, it's been pierced by this one case. And if that's the case, it might trickle through so that other big pharma companies are held liable. So let's talk about it. Last week, we had talked about whether or not big pharma could be held liable if there was a way to pierce the PrEP Act. The PrEP Act is the immunity that big pharma got from the government for all claims related to COVID products due to the emergency nature of the pandemic. Well, we talked about whether or not the PrEP Act could be pierced if there was some evidence of fraud or something of that ilk, because maybe that's how that armor gets pierced. Well, look at this case. This is Dan Nowacki, Michigan resident. He had 2 strokes and he had his leg amputated after receiving remdesivir. Sorry, I practiced that today and it just didn't come out. That's a COVID treatment. It's not a COVID vaccine. Now, he had it in November of 2021. He had a series of doses. And then after, a few weeks later, remdesivir was recalled due to contamination with glass particles in your COVID medicine.
How does that happen? How do you get ground up glass particles in your batch? And apparently it happened to a lot of people. It wasn't just him.
Enough that they recalled it.
I mean,
I don't know.
It's like Homer Simpson that works there and he just walks by and he's hitting beakers that fall in and smash. How does that happen in this environment?
More scientific
I know, I'm sure there is. I'm just curious how the hell that happens.
So here is a piece of that evidence. This is his son writing to the hospital where he was treated. It's hard to read, but what he's saying is, did my father, have any of these batches? And the hospital writes him back. This is a letter from the hospital to him saying, yes, indeed, our records indicate that your father did receive this 2 doses of this batch that was then recalled later. It said we gave it to him on November 10th and 11th, and then 13th and 14th, and the recall didn't happen until December 3rd. So he was getting this, that the drug company then later found out, whoops, this is dangerous, let's recall it. But this poor guy got 5 whole doses, had 2 strokes, and then legs amputated. So will this piercing of the armor, this is the question, affect other pharmaceuticals who made COVID vaccines, who we know now there is a non-zero chance of adverse events, serious ones, from the COVID vaccine? Will they now be held liable? According to Health blogger Steve Kirsch, this could mean that Pfizer is held liable for the SV40 contamination. So let's talk about this, because last week it was confirmed that the Pfizer COVID vaccine had the SV40 sequence. Here is what Health Canada wrote to the Epoch Times confirming this. They said Health Canada expects sponsors to identify biologically functional DNA sequence within the plasmid, such as an SV40 enhancer, at the time of submission. Although the full DNA sequence of the Pfizer plasmid was provided at the time of initial filing, the sponsor did not specifically identify the SV40 sequence. So Health Canada is saying, yes, there's SV40 in it, but we didn't know it when Pfizer submitted their documents. Now, the FDA and the CDC has not said whether or not Pfizer told them about this SV40. So they're in a catch-22. Do they say they knew about it and went forward and then didn't tell us, so we didn't have informed consent, the consumers or the patients? Or do they say they didn't know about it, and if they didn't know about it, that's possibly fraud, right? There's something that Pfizer may have a pierce in that armor. Now, doctors say that SV40 is a carcinogen or cause cancer. Others say, well, no, SV40 is actually not necessarily a cancer-causing agent. Well, the thing is that we don't know because we're not allowed to study it. So you can say SV40 causes cancer. You can say it doesn't. There is an argument for the fact that it doesn't because it's not the SV40 antigen. It's a delivery device. We're going to talk about the distinction in a second. But here is some proof that you're just not supposed to know about SV40, and you're not supposed to continue studying it if you're a researcher. This is from the book Turtles All the Way Down. Now, what they're saying is what some medical researchers say. I know that's not a good screen. I'm going to read it to you, and don't worry about how that looks crappy on your phone. I apologize. What they're saying is that SV40 is related to the polio vaccine. And that's interesting because in 1960, this researcher, Bernice Eddy, a researcher at the NIH, discovered that injecting hamsters with a small amount of the substrate used in the Salk polio vaccine led to the development of cancerous tumors in the hamsters. She was told she could not publish this discovery. Her managers were concerned that the publication could severely harm the vaccination program, but she presented her findings anyway at a scientific cancer conference in New York. Her manager's response was swift. Her lab was taken away from her. She was demoted and moved to another position. Soon thereafter, her findings were corroborated by other researchers, and the carcinogen in the substrate was identified by 2 Merck researchers. What did they find? A previously unidentified virus found in the rhesus monkey kidneys, which had been used to grow the polio virus for the vaccine. The new virus was named SV40. Further tests confirmed its presence in a significant portion in both the Salk and Sabin vaccines, so they're the 2 popular polio vaccines produced in the United States. So when this researcher found a connection, she did not find a connection between the SV40 antigen She just found a connection between that vaccine, which contained SV40, and cancer and tumors, right? So do we know? So when people say we don't know that SV40 causes cancers, it's because they're not allowed to study it. They literally don't know. In fact, some say, well, what's in these vaccines is just the SV40 promoter and not the antigen, meaning the thing that causes the virus, and that this has been used in other vaccines for decades. Again, look what happened to the one woman who wanted to study it. She was deplatformed, basically canceled, right? So they just don't know. So when they say, no, this is not a carcinogen and it's fine, they don't know. They don't know which element of SV40 was carcinogenic. They only found evidence of it in hamsters, and they told her not to publish it. So this could mean that the Pfizer vaccine may have had contamination, just like remdesivir, if anyone were willing to look into it, which they're not, right? But given that the FDA and the CDC have not said a damn word about SV40 since this revelation last week from Health Canada, it's an important question. Did the FDA know about this? If so, when? Or did Pfizer not tell them? Did they falsify documents? That's the question.
And we may be getting some answers on this because a number of high-profile doctors and members of Congress are now, where you've seen a lot of COVID stories floating around over the past few weeks, right?
Yeah.
We saw this with nursing moms or with other stories. It didn't really seem to strike the alarm bells like this story.
Yeah.
But over the past 24 hours, I've seen a number of high-profile doctors, Dr. Asim Mayorta and others, who are raising the alarm bells of this. We may get an investigation that goes through Congress, may have people called before
I don't think
Parliament.
we're going to get that. There's no appetite for that in
the
government.
European Union.
Maybe.
This is a big deal. This is not a small this is not a small problem.
No. What I think that the only way we're going to get this is through litigation. And it's got to be, if you think about the idea of piercing the corporate armor, there's got to be a bunch of little swords thrown at it to pierce the armor. For every 10 lawsuits, probably one of them will put a chink in that armor. Is that a chink in the armor?
Yeah, not a shink.
Whatever.
A chink, yeah. A chink in the armor.
And so it's only through litigation that we're going to get these answers. And Pfizer will be dragged into this, and the FDA will too. Here's how. Go ahead.
I was just going to say one benefit to one of them piercing the armor will be that will set a precedent. And once the precedent is set, then it will be easier for more to win.
Right. Yeah. So, I hate the idea that Americans were too litigious, but this is how we litigate our values. And if we're saying we were wronged by the government and these companies during the pandemic, it has to be solved in the courts. That's no other way because duels are not allowed right now. Did you know that journalists used to carry guns because they were regularly challenged to duels? That's just not the way we live right now. So it has to be litigation, unfortunately. Here's how health blogger Steve Kirsch put it. He says, now the FDA is at a crossroads. Either they admit they knew about the plasma contamination and failed to disclose that to the public or outside committees, or they can claim they didn't know about it, in which case Pfizer is liable. And we have the Pfizer documents that were given to the FDA, so we know what the FDA got. And I seriously doubt there's any disclosure of SV40 contamination. We haven't seen it, but is it somewhere else that we haven't seen? Means we have an adulterated vaccine and the FDA has to remove it from the market until that is fixed. And if the FDA doesn't do that, this is what he's saying, should face criminal prosecution for endangering the public and not following the law. So again, and he further says that he's speaking to, personal harm attorneys, other people, business attorneys who would be looking into this. He says he got off the phone with this one attorney and confirmed that here's a list of 90 lawyers you can contact if you want to sue the vaccine manufacturers. So they are ramping up. Will any of them succeed in piercing that corporate veil? Clayton, so I guess now we have a little friendly bet. He thinks Congress is going to do something about it. I find that laughable. I think it has to be solved in the courts.
I think you're right. I think we will see that. And I think that if the amount of lawsuits you're about to see unfold is going to be unprecedented, I think. And as Steve Kirsch just further, he's just tweeting a moment ago, he said, legal opinions will vary, of course, but I just got off the phone with a very high profile attorney who asked not to be named and said that the key question is, do you have to tie your harm to the adulteration specifically of this vaccine? And he said, Or does the adulteration remove the liability protection on the base product? He said, as expected, the case is stronger if you can link the adulteration causing the injuries, but there is still liability if you didn't give informed consent to having an adulterated product injected into your body. So the answer is it's not necessary, which is stunning. So amount of lawsuits that we could see going after Pfizer and these scumbags who pulled all of this garbage on people and lied to people, and then going after the FDA.
Yeah.
And what did the CDC know? And who at the CDC signed off on these things? Who at the FDA signed off on these things? What about Dr. Fauci? At what point, how high does this go in this chain? And that's where I think Congress can get involved and full on major congressional hearings on this.
And how far back? So I've just shown you this one case from 1960 where a researcher tried to study SV40, tried to study the cancer-causing agents in the polio vaccine, and was told to shut it down. So what other studies have been shut down? So I watched some of the conversation on Twitter from people who are saying, oh, stop it, SV40 does not cause cancer. How can they say that? I can't say it does. I can say that this lady found a correlation, but I can't say it does, and I can't say it doesn't. And there is an entire... not conspiracy, there's a concerted effort to stop down on vaccine research such as this. So we've shown it to you. Let us know what you think.
Now let's talk about
story.
Okay, that's great. An amazing job. And I'm fascinated by this. We've invited Steve Kirsch to join us here on the show. He's been a guest on the show before, so hopefully Steve can come on to talk more about this. He's out there fighting the good fight on the litigation side of this and trying to get people answers. My question is, does it make sense for there to be like some big class action lawsuit? I saw someone here in the chat just saying, come on, guys, class action lawsuit. And we know that lawyers make a lot of money on class action lawsuits. Does it do enough, though, to go after these companies? Or is it better to have 200, 300, 400 different civil cases? Because they're all going to be different. That's the thing, right? Because the damages might be different. Like, people can bring class...
Not in this case. I think a class action lawsuit absolutely makes sense because...
But then they could argue, of course, and we could ask a lawyer on this, like different batches may mean different things, right?
Not if there is proof that all of them had SV40 and none of them had consent, then no. In fact, the history of a class action lawsuit came from mass producing products.
Right.
Whereas at once, you and I, you used my horse, you broke your leg, you sued me or whatever, right? We knew each other. Mass producing products means you don't know the person that sold you your cigarette or what have you. You're buying it in bulk. And so if you are all harmed similarly, you have a case. So I would encourage you, if you're interested in this, to go and look out for these Steve Kirsch tweets and find the list of lawyers and maybe talk to them if you're interested in this.
How many of you know somebody or were personally affected by this? Like, I'm just curious. Maybe we can put up a poll here, David. Can you put up a poll on our? Because I don't think has Rumble added a poll yet. Rumble, come on, add the poll. But on YouTube, I'm really curious, and we can even follow it up in the newsletter tomorrow.
Okay, but here's how we have to frame it because of the industrial censorship complex. Is just like, do you know anyone who had adverse events from?
Why don't we just ask it very, very generically so YouTube doesn't literally kick our channel off the air?
Yeah, have you or anyone you know been affected by what we're talking about?
Yes, yes, that's good. Yes. Do you? Yeah. Have you or anyone you know been affected by what we are talking about? That's how.
It's code. We're talking in code with you.
Yeah.
20,000 people.
So, we got 15,000 of you watching on Rumble right now. So,
you can come over and vote on the YouTube stream and then you can come back.
If you want to, and then hop back over to Rumble, a free speech platform. There you go. Have you or anyone you know been affected by what we are talking about? That's right. Just let us know in the comments.
And I wanted to add, too, like to Clayton's point about Congress, I think if the FDA ends up being implicated, Congress will have no choice but to respond in some way to either put some kind of thing in place to control the FDA and what they can actually do in the CDC. So I think at some point they will have to get involved.
Yeah, you'd like to think so. Depends on who's running the show. They don't even have a Speaker of the House right now.
They suck. So we have no.
But also like how often does it happen though in class action lawsuits where the offending party just settles, and then part of that settling is they admit no fault?
Yeah.
And so then like you have to have the lawyers that are not after the monetary compensation. They have to be motivated by like the punishment aspect of it. Otherwise you don't put that chink in the armor. You can't pierce it then.
So the question is too, I see some people raising the question about emergency use authorization. If it's an emergency vaccine, where does that fall? Does that give them sort of blanket protection here in some other way? And apparently, no, it doesn't.
Yeah.
It doesn't. So anyway, fascinating. Very excited to see where this goes. And you know, took an army of people to try to figure this one out, but hopefully we'll get answers so these people don't just like run roughshod over us.
1,100 votes already, 71% yes.
Yes.
Jeez. Keep the votes coming in, guys. All right, we've got more news to get to. We're going to talk about medical assistance in dying, the MAID Act in Canada, which is expanding. Canada has the largest number of medical assisted suicides in the world. The United States is catching up to them. Netherlands is not far behind. Belgium also getting close. Actually, United States is about fourth down on the list, but Netherlands is getting close. But now Canada wants to expand this program even more. We will tell you, you won't believe exactly how they want to expand it. It's unbelievable. We'll talk about that, plus a big free speech Supreme Court case. This is a landmark case for free speech. If you care at all about free speech, you're going to want to stick around for this story. That's next. But let's first talk about something that's truly close to my heart, which is family and financial security. The last few years have been filled with many uncontrollable, unpredictable events, a pandemic, inflation, wars, political turmoil, and more. And this makes safeguarding our loved ones and taking control of our financial future even more crucial. So when it comes to investing, I trust our friends over at Moomoo, the Silicon Valley-based online trading platform. It's my favorite app for trading stocks, ETFs, commodities, options. There are no commissions, no account minimums. They've been a longtime supporter of our show here on Redacted. There's no hidden fees. There's none of that. And they offer a plethora of great features to help make investing decisions easier, regardless of the size of your portfolio. Maybe you're just getting started, or you're more experienced. It has all sorts of advanced features that you normally pay for on other platforms. Moomoo is fantastic. And guess what? You're going to get free learning courses, free learning resources, up-to-date market news, analyst expectations, all right inside of the application. And it's free to download. It's easy to access. Just try it. You can download it. And the best part is it's great for beginners. So if you want to take control of your financial future and your loved ones, protect your family, make smart decisions, I love having my portfolio send me alerts throughout the day in there. It's really great. You can get up to 16 free stocks. That's right. 16 free stocks right now just by downloading the application and making your initial deposits inside the account and then keeping that account open for at least 60 days. If you keep your funds in the account for at least 60 days, you'll get to keep all of those free stocks. So it's like a free savings account. And then after that, if you don't want them anymore, right, sell the stocks, but you just got all that free money. So it's really great. Why not do it, right? This offer ends soon, so make sure to get started today. A big thanks to Moomoo for supporting this channel. Redacted.inc/Moomoo is the place to go. Redacted.inc/Moomoo is the link that you need to check it out.
All right, well, free speech on the internet is what it is at stake at an upcoming Supreme Court case. The Supreme Court decided to take on this big case about whether or not the government can censor your speech through social media. This is a big one. We've been watching for it. I've been watching for weeks to see what they would do. They took the case. Now, it's not all good news. While they took the case, they said, but for now, the government still can censor social media. So let's talk about what this means, what's at stake here. To me, it is at the heart of what it means to be free in America. There's almost no bigger case at this point, whether or not we get to decide what's true or the government decides what's true.
And when you see around the world right now what's happening in the United Kingdom, I just went deep diving on research today about all of the censorship that's being foisted on journalists. We have journalists who are in Germany and other countries right now. They're being prosecuted for telling the truth, for people that are blogging, telling the truth about wars. They're being rounded up and prosecuted. They're being handed papers by the government. And it's really, really frightening. And so the heart of being American is freedom of speech.
Yes. So do we stand for it or don't we? This is I can't believe it has to go this far, but it is going to the courts. Now, this is the case where the Biden administration has been begging the courts to let them censor speech online. 2 states' attorneys general brought this federal case against the Biden administration and other government organizations. They accused them of censoring speech online around the pandemic. They made a very strong case. We've shown you proof. The government did do that. It told social media to censor information and downrank information about even true topics. The original ruling came in July from Judge Terry Doughty. He ruled that the Biden administration had violated First Amendment rights by working directly with social media to censor speech around COVID and other topics, and that they cannot do that anymore. The Biden administration appealed, and an appeals court mostly agreed with Judge Doughty and said, you still can't do that. So they took the case all the way to the Supreme Court, said, but we really want to. We really want to tell social media what to downrank and what to not allow if it goes against government mandated thought. And so now they took the case. But first they put a stay on the ruling. So that means that any ruling by the previous appeals court or by Judge Doughty cannot be enforced while the court takes the case. So for now, the government can do this. They can be working with social media to downrank information, even though, again, I won't drag it out because we've seen it in action. We've shown you the screenshots of government officials telling social media to censor even true speech about COVID, vaccine hesitation, vaccine adverse events, true stories about Hunter Biden, true stories about the war in Ukraine, so as to keep hold of the narrative of all of those things that keep them in power. If you want proof, go back to any of those segments that we
Just
did.
go to Congress a few months ago when they had RFK Jr. testifying, and they tried to, it was a censorship hearing, and they tried to censor him at the censorship hearing.
Right.
Like,
But this is about social media. This is about how they worked with YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Pinterest, what else? TikTok, you name it. And they tried to reach out and downrank things that they did not like. And they gave justifications of like, this is true, for instance, about natural immunity, but we can't let people talk about natural immunity online because it promotes vaccine hesitancy.
I love that they were downranking Pinterest pins. Like that's what the Biden administration is spending their time on, Pinterest. So I don't like this recipe. Like someone in the Biden administration is like, this is not a good chili recipe. Like, let's downrank that pin.
That's not exactly what they did. But
I know. The platform Parler that stood up against it, they got canceled because Apple removed them. Amazon stopped hosting their information, so they just were completely wiped off the planet for not complying.
That was more around January 6th, though. This lawsuit is specifically
that's what they turned
COVID.
it into, but it was because there was misinformation about other things on there as well.
Oh,
but yeah,
misinformation,
that ultimately was the
word.
deciding factor.
Right, you're right. Now, the court says they may not hear this case until the spring of next year. Interestingly enough, the court issued a stay, but no opinion. So no justices said, well, yes, we think the government made its case on the stay, that they need to keep doing this. They just issued the stay. Nobody's speaking out on behalf. Nobody said why. Now, the government, in order to get a stay, has to say, we are harmed by this law, so take it off the books for now while we litigate it. And so in the dissent by 3 justices, I'm going to show it to you in a second, they said, the government's not being harmed by this. Like, how is that? It's such a high bar, and we don't know why this is happening. Now, here's the dissenting opinion, the 3 justices who say, we do not think they should get a stay, and we do think this is a very serious case, and we're taking this on, and we're going to handle it. So it's Justice Alito, Justice Thomas, and Justice Gorsuch. Interesting what they say here about it is that government censorship of private speech is antithetical to our democratic form of government, and therefore today's decision is highly disturbing. The decision for the stay, which we get no opinion for. Like, given that the government was granted a stay, granted this right to continue to suppress our freedoms, shouldn't we have at least one justice who tells us why they did that? We get no opinion.
Like, you're allowing a violation of our First Amendment rights to go on while they get their shit together and figure this out and actually take up this case. I mean, I don't want to liken it to someone, like a violent criminal who you're letting out on bail. And it's kind of the same thing. And who knows how many lives actually could have been affected by what the Biden administration has done with social media and hiding information, whether it's around COVID or other things, right? Not allowing you to... Maybe you did something to your body because of a vaccine.
No, disinformation campaigns that are labeled like anti-disinformation cause harm.
Yeah.
They do.
So in some ways, then it's kind of like a violent criminal getting out on bail and then then causing another offense while they're out on bail, basically.
Well, look at how the government argued this. This is how the government played their argument that they need to stay while they litigate. Look, it says the government claims that the injunction might prevent the president and senior officials who serve as his proxies from speaking to the matter on public concerns. Skip down past all this mumbo jumbo. The president himself is not subject to the injunction, though, and in any event, the injunction does not prevent any government official from speaking on any matter or from urging any entity or person to act in accordance with the government's view of responsible conduct. The injunction only applies when the government crosses the line and begins to coerce or control others exercising their free speech right. So does the government think that the First Amendment allows executive branch officials to engage in such conduct? Does it have plans for this to occur between now and when the case is decided? So see, here's a very important question. Does your right to free speech conflict with the government's right to speech? Because that's what they're arguing, is basically, it seems the government thinks that it's an either or situation. Either they tell you what to think and what to say, or you think for yourself and have free speech.
Like they have a different level.
It cannot be both.
Like a different standard for speech.
Well, yeah, what they're saying is that this law is
it almost protects
keeping the president and his proxies from speaking. But it's not. They can say whatever the F they want.
Unfettered, though. This is the thing, right? They want to be able to say what they want unfettered by criticism.
Yes.
But that's it. They want to be able to put out something, a CDC alert on Twitter, and not have community notes, people jump all over it and say that's actually not true.
Right.
Think about how many there were Twitter posts and Facebook posts by the federal government. They paid for these.
Yeah.
Right. Imagine if those were community noted and people said, actually, this is misinformation, what you're putting out here.
Right.
They want a protection, a shield, and they want to be able to speak publicly unfettered without criticism. Yeah,
this seems to me a task. Their argument, their basis of the argument seems to me an admission that they are liars because they cannot speak if the population is free to speak.
Right.
Right? Uh-huh. So they're admitting we have to be free to lie.
Yeah.
Basically.
Right. Yeah, we need to be able to pull the wool over people's eyes, you know, and lie to people. That's the only way we're going to get this agenda through. You're seeing it in Canada. And by the way, in countries that don't have a First Amendment, I mean, this is what the World Economic Forum hates, right? Klaus Schwab hates the First Amendment. They hate these countries, the United States, that has this protection because Canada's getting rid of it, putting in all sorts of different layers of censorship in social media platforms and journalism and et cetera. Other countries throughout Europe are doing the same thing. The United Kingdom that doesn't have these same protections doing the same thing.
Right.
Australia, New Zealand. And so the United States is like this
hanging on by a thread, you guys. Like, we're hanging on by a thread for this essential freedom. This is what journalist Michael Schellenberger calls the censorship industrial complex. It's the government's way of concentrating censorship into their own hands, and it expands as they expand people who will let them do it, like social media, right? There's money in it. They want to do it. I remember like years ago, I was in this wine bar with some of my book club friends, and
wild night.
And this like
wild night
young
at the wine
girl
bar.
She was from Ireland, and she's like, "Oh, I just graduated from high school. I'm going to go work in New York City as a disinformation." And I was like, "That's a career now." Like, you get these young girls who want to be virtuous, and they will go and be like, "Oh yes, that's wrong. Let's not let people say that."
Was her name?
Right?
What was her name? That was the disinformation governance board.
Nina Jankowicz.
Nina Jankowicz. You're like,
No.
you're at a wine bar with Nina Jankowicz. This is a story I want to hear.
Right.
But she's like a mini Nina Jankowicz, basically.
Right. And I was like, oh, that's interesting.
I'm going to go to New York City and work in disinformation.
Just like this, young girl in a bar is trying to tell me how harmful it is that people speak freely on the internet. And, she's from Ireland and she's going to go do this career in New York City. And I'm like, we're screwed. Okay. So one of the plaintiffs in this case is Professor Jay Bhattacharya from Stanford. His lawyer had this to say about the Supreme Court taking up the case, breaking that the SCOTUS granted certificate and has also granted the stay motion without written explanation and a dissent from these three justices. She says, we look forward to vindicating the First Amendment rights of our clients and all Americans in the nation's highest court. So she's got herself a case to argue in front of the Supreme Court for all of us. Now, the stay is concerning, but it's also positive. I want to take Michael Schellenberger's public post about this because I think it's interesting. He says the responsibility on the plaintiffs and the justices grows heavier. The plaintiffs will need to explain to the justices why we need to stop the government from using not just coercive measures, but all measures to motivate social media and the internet search companies from engaging in politically motivated censorship. As this person noted, the First Amendment protects free speech from forms of government interference that include but go far beyond coercion because the First Amendment says that there shall be no law abridging the freedom of speech or the press. We reported here how Facebook executives went along with this because they were worried the Biden administration wouldn't protect their $2 billion business in Europe. But he points out, there's no guarantee that the Supreme Court will do the right thing here. And these media outlets, he mentions the New York Times, the Washington Post, and NPR, the PBS, will persist with their conspiracy theory that the censorship industrial complex, is just not real. It didn't happen, that it's right-wing conspiracy. But as the case is debated in our highest court, attracting international attention and resulting in a ruling one way or the other, fewer and fewer people will get to believe them. So at this point, there's nothing we can do. We can't write our congressman. We can't do much about it. It's in the hands of the court. But at least we can, reject media that tells you that this is crazy talk. It's not. It's happening. And we can cross all fingers and toes and watch this case with bated breath.
Let's go, United States. If you
prove to
us if you really you stand for free speech, you stand for your Constitution, you stand for your Bill of Rights, then please.
This is like CPR on the Constitution, you guys.
Hopefully
please.
We can set this precedent.
Getting up in debate club and trying to argue why bullying is really better for everybody. I mean, it's basically like I just want to hear that argument. Like I'm just like at that point I'm interested. I'm like, oh please do tell.
Please explain how bullying is better for everyone. Definitely. Yeah. Oh brother. All right. Well, let us know your thoughts on that in the comments below. I saw someone just a few moments ago saying, hey, please everyone smash that like button because it actually really helps in the algorithm on YouTube. It helps end wokeness. It's actually true because YouTube doesn't promote our show. And so if you actually hit the like button during a live stream, it actually pushes us further out into the algorithm. And I don't know if they've figured out this trick or not yet, but they still haven't clamped down on that yet. So I know when I ask you to do that, the thousands of you that smash the like button, it actually pushes us further out in the algorithm, and more people who may be like sitting there watching CNN videos will be like, what is this about free speech? Oh, and they might actually learn something. So please do that. It does actually help push us further out there. We'll see how long YouTube allows that to happen before they clamp down on that feature. But for now, it's there. So anyway, all right, we've got more news to get to. We're going to talk about MAID in Canada. Of course, the medical assistance in dying, which is a funny way of just calling, it's like a maid is coming over to your house. It's so sweet. It's so nice.
Sweep you up with the dirt on the floor.
It's unbelievable. So, yeah, and we're going to tell you how they're expanding this in Canada in just a moment. But first, it's no secret. If you're tuned in, then you know experts are predicting a recession heading our way. Layoffs are already happening. The government is ready to print more money. We saw today unbelievable notes about the 10-year Treasury, meaning that means interest rates and, of course, inflation here for a while. This is scaring a lot of investors. This is why so many governments right now and sovereign wealth managers are buying up as much gold as they can. Gold could be about to hit $2,000 an ounce. We're watching it very closely. I think it was about $1,977 this morning. So a lot of people think it's going to hit over 2,000 very, very soon as people are pouring into gold away from this volatility right now that we're seeing in the markets. Also, silver prices up. So gold and silver right now, both very affordable. And our friends over at Lear Capital can actually help you get set up right now with a gold account. So you can start buying silver, buying gold. You can have it shipped right to your house, or you can actually have it stored off-site. They can help you get set up with a precious metals or converting part of your IRA or your 401k into a gold or silver IRA. Most people have like an old IRA sitting around, or they left a job years ago and they have a 401k that they left. It's still sitting there. You can actually convert that into a self-directed account. So it's not just in stocks. And you can actually buy assets like gold, silver, real estate that you control and that a bank doesn't control. And our friends at Lear Capital can help you get set up with a self-directed IRA. They can help you roll it over. It's very, very simple to do. We have a self-directed IRA that we buy gold inside of it and real estate, and it's fantastic. So call them today. Our friends at Lear Capital are fantastic. Really great. They have hundreds of five-star reviews, thousands of five-star reviews. They have over 25 years experience. And it's risk-free guarantee that gives you 24 hours to review your purchase before committing. Here's their 800 number on your screen. Call 1-800-613-3557 or go to learredacted.com. That's Lear redacted.com. Or just call their 800 number and talk to them on the phone. 1-800-613-3557. Well, the Justin Trudeau government in Canada loves to help in the assistance of suicide in that country. Of course, Canada leads the world in medically assisted suicide under their MAID program. Tens of thousands of Canadians have taken advantage of this program, and the government actively promotes this program. They team up with television networks to do fluffy pieces about how great it is to have the government assisting in suicide. Well, now the Canadian government is expanding the MAID program to include legally assisted suicide for drug addicts and people with mental disorders. The country's medical assistance in dying law, which originally took effect in 2016, has ended the lives of thousands upon thousands of Canadians. David Craden is a journalist in Canada. He writes at the Post Millennial and Human Events, and has Craden's Right on YouTube, and has written extensively about the MAID program. David, welcome back to the show. So, were you surprised that they're expanding the MAID program?
No, we anticipated they would be expanding the MAID program to include people with mental health issues. They put it on hold for a year because there was so much documentation coming out about Canada being the #1 suicide destination in the world. And in fact, the latest figures available and it's a euphemism, medical assistance in dying, another word for euthanasia as far as I'm concerned. But over 10,000 people died as a result of this program in 2021. More in 2022. We don't have the figures yet. And I'm sure by the end of 2023, we will reach another new peak. But nobody expected this to go beyond mental health to include drug addicts. Now, is that also going to include alcoholics? I wonder. That seems to be the natural progression. But the point for me, Clayton, is that even if you really think it's a good idea to help people kill themselves, this program is looking more and more like blatant euthanasia, just getting rid of people because you don't like them. You don't like what they are or who they are, and who's going to be next, because my God, this sounds a lot like eugenics to me.
Under the current MAID laws, those with, quote, grievous and irremediable medical conditions are eligible to end their lives. And so undergoing sort of an assessment that, you know what, I'm so addicted to painkillers. There's no other option for me. You've just got to end my life. And then Canadian taxpayers foot the bill to end the lives of these individuals. It is eugenics. There's no other way to spin it. This is part of a World Economic Forum plan. The idea of making sure that a world population is lowered. Using this in Canada is is exactly what they want, what these globalists want, and they're trying it in other countries, by the way. So Canada is not alone in this.
No, but certainly I think Canada is more enthusiastic about ending people's lives than any other country, or at least any other democratic nation that I'm aware of. I find this to be a national embarrassment. If Canada is known as a destination for suicide, people are coming here to die. I mean, that's a pretty sad state of affairs. But when I hear doctors talk about this, and doctors who are participating in the program, and say that it's not fair to exclude people from this program,
right,
as if it's some kind of wonderful privilege. And I really wonder what the mindset has become, where doctors who are supposed to be upholding the Hippocratic Oath and supporting people to live, not die, are becoming more and more open to broadening this program, this medical assistance in dying program. It worries me because you, as you have read, I'm sure, it was the scientists and the doctors in Nazi Germany who were so much behind the euthanasia program there.
Right.
They thought it was a great idea, or else they would not have had the participation they had. And it worries me when I hear professionals, doctors, talking about this program in such a positive light. And I certainly hope I'm never in a situation where a doctor can pull the plug on me that way. But I personally right now, there's a member of my family who is going through severe physical issues. A week ago, she was very near death. She's getting better. She's recuperating. But thank God there was nobody around to say, well, we better just euthanize her because the prognosis doesn't look good today. And I'm 100% against any form of euthanasia. But certainly a program that joyfully talks about killing people like it's some kind of benefit, it's mystifying to me. And to me, it's part of the death cult that the Trudeau government celebrates. Whether it's unrestricted abortion on demand to the last trimester, or whether it's this kind of euthanasia. This is a celebration of death, and to me, it's completely foreign to what Canada has always been about, what Canada has fought for in 2 world wars, and what Canada should still be about. But obviously, Justin Trudeau is not about and has no intention of being that way.
Is there a pushback? I mean, this is transhumanism. This is eugenics, the eugenics program that people thought ended sort of after World War II. We wouldn't know about it. It's as Whitney Webb, a journalist on our show, has articulated very well, that the eugenics program never went away. It's just evolved. It's under a different name. We now know that Canada, the Netherlands, Belgium, the United States, all on track where people can die with assisted suicide, and these countries are growing in numbers, catching up to Canada. The Netherlands is catching up to Canada with assisted suicide. So all over the Western-backed, World Economic Forum-backed world has these ties to this Nazi plan to basically to end people's lives here. Is there pushback on the conservative side in Parliament against this, and maybe a move by the Canadian government to try to end this?
Well, there was a private member's bill before the House of Commons right now, sponsored by Ed Fast. He's a Conservative member of Parliament from Abbotsford, British Columbia. And he decided that the only way to counteract this program was not to suggest the Liberals are going to end it. He knows that. But could the Liberals at least agree to not include the mentally ill? Because that's just plain irresponsible. How can somebody who's mentally ill make a determination about whether they want to live or die? Because it's just irresponsible. And the Liberals are refusing to support that private member's bill because they're quite serious about going forth with this. And not only to just say people who are mentally ill, but they're going to include people with addictions in this. And that's highly troublesome. But you know what is ironic about this and hypocritical is that this Trudeau government has been pushing supervised injection sites all across Canada for the last decade, where people can legally shoot up heroin and other illegal drugs in a so-called safe setting. This has all been part of the harm reduction program. So while the Trudeau government says it's okay now for people with drug addictions to end their lives, they are creating addictions. They are creating more addictions by making it easier, by facilitating drug access. And they're giving away free drugs on the streets in places like Vancouver and Toronto. They're giving away free drugs. They're creating addiction problems. So a lot of the harm reduction people who say, well, we want addicts to have safe access to drugs, even they are saying, well, this really isn't harm reduction at all. But perhaps that's where this Trudeau government's going. They really don't want anyone to go through less harm. They want to induce harm. And as far as I'm concerned, there's no safe level of ingesting heroin. There's no safe supervised injection site. They're all unsafe because overdoses in British Columbia and Vancouver are skyrocketing because there are 4 injection sites in that city where addicts daily shoot up. And to say that this is saving lives is absolute insanity. But you can see where this Trudeau government is going. Create addictions, create mental health, and then we can just ask them to commit suicide because it'll be easier that way. And that to me is horrific. And smacks of those people who worked in concentration camps and extermination camps during the Second World War. And I think it's absolutely abominable.
Yeah, I agree with you. And I think also we've covered here on the show the idea that, if you have a lot of debt, you're in financial debt. You know what? Maybe the easier way out for you, if you have a lot of financial debt, is medically assisted suicide. If you're depressed about it, if you're depressed, you're upset, you're anxious because you have a lot of debt. You know what? There's a better way for you. There's a better way out, and that's what the Trudeau government is.
You could judge people who think that way to be mentally ill, and that is what is a Pandora's box about this, because the concept of being mentally ill can easily be applied to just about any kind of thought that is destructive against yourself, that is self-harming. So therefore, it's easy to group just about anybody into this category of mentally ill, even somebody who for a week is perhaps suicidal. But anyone who's worked in recovery centers or anyone who's worked with people who feel that way know that feeling passes. The darkness goes, and there's always a light at the end. You just have to bring people through that depression, through that period of unease, and bring them into the light, bring them into a place of health. And this program has nothing to do with health. And the fact that it's overseen by the Minister of Health is, again, part of the whole Orwellian environment of the Trudeau government. And to call it this MAID is, once again, it's newspeak. It's calling suicide something that sounds almost admirable, almost desirable.
Yeah.
And of course, it comes down to, once again, this is nothing more than a euthanasia, a eugenics, and a suicide program.
Yeah, the MAID will come to your house and take care of you. That's exactly right. David Creighton, great to see you. Thank you so much for keeping us sane here, covering the craziness up in Canada as this MAID program expands under the Trudeau government. Thanks, David.
Thank you so much, Clayton.
And thanks so much, David. And thanks to all of you for subscribing to the show. You know, it is a free show. So I know when we say subscribe, is there any money related to that? No. It's totally free to subscribe. And I think it's follow over on Rumble, or I know they changed the name so much. Subscribe, follow. Anyway, it's all free. However, if you want to support independent journalism, you can also join our Plus community. And for the price of a cup of coffee once a month, you can actually become a part of our Plus community. You get access to exclusive content, interviews before anyone else gets to see them, our live streams, which are exclusive to the private members as well. So again, you can come over to redacted.inc and click on the community button. And again, very, very cheap. If you want to support what we do here, we are user supported. So we are not funded by billionaires. But if you want to support independent journalism, because independent journalism is under attack, I don't know if you've noticed. So many of our friends who have channels have had their channels shut down. So We are really under attack by the globalists, and we really appreciate your support. So thank you guys so much for watching us, being a part of our great community here. Again, go to redacted.inc and become a part of our Plus Club, and we really appreciate it. We'll be back here tomorrow at 4 p.m. Eastern Time. Until then, have a great night, everyone.